Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Go check them out today at Roll20.net. Also, we are recognizing the following Patreon shout-outs. Ruben Riviera, Chris Coney, Andrew Schwilling, I'm going to butcher names. This is what I do. Andy Hall, Peter Adams, John Steve, and Corin Q. We have now reached
for it to have their name butchered by you on air.
That's right. If you're playing the live with the home game, mark off that section on your bingo card.
Is that gonna be a weekly thing?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to make it into a weekly thing. I'm gonna try to I really am seriously trying to put together a bingo card for the show for the Patreons on the Patreon channel, so they can actually have a printed out bingo card.
Jared fucks up names. Bingo.
Jared mispronounced something. That's at least 4 squares on that bingo chart. And so tonight's topic is layers. Elevating your game by making things more complex, more deeper, richer characters, deeper worlds, more cinematic and narrative combat. And here to discuss it, as always, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hello.
Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
Greetings and salutations.
And some call him Jib. The strong silent type. So tonight, we also, if you're watching the show live streaming, feel free to participate in the chat, and we will address those things that appear in chat as we come up to them in the show. So there's a little bit. This is kind of dovetails nicely into not only the Wild Die podcast had a conversation similar to this about balanced encounters and extending combat encounters. This is also a flavor that's rolling around in the G+ communities as well, talking about going a step beyond just the meta mechanics and the roll hit wound, roll hit wound, roll hit wound style of play. What we want to do is just sort of try to tackle that topic. I want to start with talking about skill application. We touched on this very briefly in a previous episode. I'd like to give some more in-depth and more detailed descriptions and advice on that when that happens in your game. As you know, Savage Worlds has a very, very limited skill tree, list. Pardon me. So there's 25 skills last time I counted.
26, something like that.
Yeah, 26 if you count knowledge skills.
Deluxe, and then obviously different settings bolt on some additional stuff, and then you also have the additional arcane skill where whether it's faith or sorcery or magic use, etc. Right. So, and we've talked about this. It's all about conceptualization again. We've talked about that over and over again. It's a reoccurring major theme and founding principle of this show, and the way we GM, which is the only way to GM. I'm going to put that out right now. It's our way or no way. If you're doing it any other way, you're doing it wrong. Of course,
we only know how to have the right kind of fun.
Of course, I'm pulling everybody's fucking leg. I don't give it 2 shits how you run the game. And we're not going to tell you to go play D&D either. So let's talk about this basic skill application. We've talked about this one before in particular, so I'm going to go ahead and start here on familiar ground. Use the repair skill as a sabotage skill. If you need to sabotage a truck and keep it from running in your game, let the player go up and do that. Let them sneak up to the car, make a stealth roll to get there, and then do a repair roll. And if they repair it, they cut the brake line, or it adds a -2 penalty to the driving roll, a -4 on a raise if they're sabotaging it.
And more importantly, do this in reverse. Have your NPCs use the skills in a manner like what we're talking about tonight, where it's maybe not the most obvious use of it. Have an NPC blacksmith who rolls fighting to appraise a sword when the players bring it in to the shop to sell it. And then, base it off of that dice roll as to whether or not the blacksmith actually knows the value of that particular weapon. You can absolutely, do some things in that matter.
Well, I totally agree with all that. I have no reason to disagree. I'm finding myself a little curious about the impetus behind why we're discussing this particular topic tonight. Where did this get its start?
Well, I know, at least for me, I don't know where did it start for Jared when he came up with the idea, but what I've been seeing a lot of lately is discussion centered on how do you make a balanced encounter, and how do you challenge the players with things other than combat encounters? You know, how do you handle kind of the layering of different parts of the game in a session, or plan that out as a GM ahead of time? And where I think kind of my failure there is I don't plan these things in advance. I kind of, shoot from the hip. And maybe that's a failure to plan enough, but at the same time, I like to think of it as a strength.
Well, okay. As everybody knows, the notion that you know what's going to happen in the game is ludicrous, because you don't. There's no way you can, because there are players involved, and the instant the players step into the game, all bets are off. So you have to shoot from the hip. You're forcing them into a line of thought that's not necessarily what they wanted to do about a thing. And that's always going to be a problem in and of itself. But the direct question, which is, well, how do I challenge my players in other ways, doesn't really have anything to do with that, and at least not, in my brain. Of course, nobody wants to go in there. It's a scary place. But okay, this seems like a really simple question to be answered to me. I'm not seeing the complexity in this and why this is befuddling people.
What's the question?
And I don't
players?
mean to just. So don't do combat encounter. Don't write things that resolve to combat.
Well, I think, and Jared, to kind of catch you up, he's asking what the impetus is behind the title of tonight's episode, and where we're what we're trying to discuss is why did this conversation come about? And I was trying to explain to him that what I've seen has been some posts and discussions as to how do you put together a session that's not just combat? How do you make things more interesting? How do you challenge the players?
Right.
And I think
I'm sorry, I'm kind of having it's on a barge off the east coast of the United States moment right now, because it's like, so do other things. Don't make everything resolve to combat. Have other problems, like, I don't know, put them in a social situation that, you have no weapons.
I think
because they took those away from you before.
Jim, I think
I'm not.
The stumbling point you're having is this is something you don't even think about doing. You've been doing it for so long it comes naturally to you. You don't consciously think about, how do I throw in a social encounter? How do I challenge them with a skill challenge instead of a combat challenge? Those things just come to you automatically. I think the discussion that has grown out of this are people who are either having a difficult time understanding how to do what they're doing in other systems with the savage mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, first off, don't do what you do in other systems.
Well, all right.
Answer.
That's a little pedantic. It's a little pedantic. I mean, don't do that thing that you're used to doing and been doing for 15 years. I don't know if that's that's kind of like a doctor.
Okay, that's the fair cop. But let me invert the equation.
Hold on, it's kind of like the doctor advice of.
Let me invert the equation a little bit.
It hurts when I do this. Then don't do this. I mean, it's kind of like.
Okay, that's a fair cop. But let me invert the equation. I would not go to run a Powered by the Apocalypse game and run it like I would run Savage Worlds. Things. Well, I would do the things that are relevant to that game.
You might starting out do it that way. You may approach it first when you're first starting out with it that way. Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I think the issue is it has its root and germination, seeding, so forth in the whole how do you challenge players in a combat encounter? And then people running into the thing that we've talked about over and over again on the show with like, wait, when you weigh exploding dice, cards for initiative, and bennies, trying to come up with a mathematically balanced encounter in combat, forget it. It's nearly impossible.
Yeah, you kind of have to balance as you go. It's fluid. You have to be fluid in your combat encounters and fluid in what you're doing, and kind of as the combat goes, you may have to tweak it a little bit.
And I don't want to necessarily say I disagree, Chris, because I absolutely get where you're coming from. You have to, as a GM, you gotta have to gauge what's going on at the table and react appropriately, so that you don't, oh well, I had this next wave planned, and if I drop this on the table, everyone dies before they even get a chance to run away. I get that aspect of that, but at the same time, for me at least, the problem is you have to stop thinking in terms of what do you do in a D&D game or a Fate game or a Savage Worlds game or a video game to challenge the player, and start thinking, so they attacked the king in the king's throne room. What is the world response when that happens? And then put that on the table and let the players come up with what their reaction to that is. Because I think what's happening is that we've gotten locked into this idea that, okay, I'm going to kill I'm going to put out 2 mooks per wild card and 1 wild card. And then I'm going to have a second wave that's 2 wild cards that come in halfway through. And these are the King's Royal Guard that show up. And then the final thing is going to be the king, but he has the Fanatics special ability so that everybody jumps in front of him and takes the hit for him. And I've also given him immunity to steal because he's wearing a special magical suit of armor. And the problem with that is that makes a great pre-written encounter to drop into, a pre-written game. But as a GM, that's a horrible encounter to give to your players, because what if the players instead walk up and just talk to the king? Now you've got all these combat stats and everything planned out, but you don't have a social conflict prepared for them. So going into it just with a knowledge of what the different mechanics are works so much better than having this idea that it's automatically going to be a 3-wave combat with X number of mooks per player character, X number of wild card per wave, etc.
Yeah, I mean what I was trying to say is that if it goes to combat, then that's when you need to be fluid. I'm not saying that it should go to combat. I'm saying that if it happens to go to combat and you're trying to balance, it may not happen. You may just need to go with the flow. Yeah, you should have other things. You should have other ways to get around it. And like Jib said, have ways that don't involve combat. I think a lot of times too, and myself included as GMs, and I think a lot of new GMs fall back to combat because that's, I don't know, I want to say easy, but it's what
familiar.
It's what people know.
It's familiar.
So let's fall back to combat because X didn't happen or X did happen, instead of looking for ways, how can we do this without having combat?
Well, it's the classic. They killed my bad guy, my big bad guy in one shot. Yeah, because Savage Worlds happens. And we've kind of had this question. What's that?
The worst one I've heard about that, and I've heard this from people like Jamie has said this repeatedly on his show as well as in posts. I've seen it from other people in other YouTube channels, that it's anticlimactic. No, it is penultimately climactic. You just had a player character do a super attack and kill the ultimate bad guy in one blow. That is the arrow shot that takes Smaug down through the missing scale. That is the sword swing at the very start of combat that takes the guy's head off. That is your moment as a GM to shine as a storyteller and take that amazing dice roll that just happened and carry that momentum into your storytelling rather than going, oh, well, you killed the big bad and now I don't have anything to do.
Right. And we've talked about it too before, right? This is the Lex Luthor Superman effect. The Lex Luthor is a human. Superman is an alien with superpowers. Lex Luthor does not stand a chance in a honest, fair fight against a superpowered alien. That does not keep him from challenging Superman.
All the time.
He goes about it he doesn't just attack him with kryptonite robots. He destroys him in the press. He attacks his family and loved ones. It's the narrative that we've been talking about. And I think that's kind of what I want to touch on when we're going to start talking about combat, especially. There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, it would be interesting in this story to have the team beset by a group of highwaymen. Oh, they're traveling from one town to the other. Hey, they pull up to a certain road and the road's blocked off with trees and it's on fire behind them. This roadblock is on fire with tar pit. And there's 4 guys standing there in black robes going, hey, why don't you go ahead and step off your horses and hand over all your shit. Now, that does not have to resolve in combat. That could be a persuasion roll. That could be hey, let's make a deal. That could be anything, but we all know most of our players are going to resort to, oh, fuck that shit. I draw by, blah, we do this. We do
almost immediately.
That's fine. So ask yourself as a GM, what's the interesting thing to happen? Are these guys highwaymen and there's only 4 of them, or do you only see 4 of them? When you step off the tree, do they rise up on the ridges of the road and now, oh shit, we're facing 100 men.
Well, I think there's another layer to this, and that is if all you present to your players are nails to drive in, then they're going to treat the world like they're a bunch of hammers. They're going to just steamroll everything. But if in your highwayman scenario you just laid out, the highwaymen are standing above and behind the fire with arrows drawn, saying, you can stand and die, or you can drop your stuff and we will let you pass. At that point, you've now set this as an encounter where the players don't even have the option to engage in standard combat. They would have to try to take cover and pick these guys off from range with no real idea how they're going to get past the roadblock, even if they resolve this with combat. You know, you can set the tone of an encounter by placing the NPCs in a manner where combat's not even an option. Take combat completely off the table. It's a guy who's called you out in the middle of the street in front of the sheriff. It's, you know, the NPC who happens to be a low-powered civilian who's standing there complaining that you let their son die. And they want vengeance. And they're standing there with, you know, a table leg in their hand. Everyone knows that if the player engages this person, it's a slaughter. It's not even, you know, this is not somebody who is of any caliber to challenge the player. You put them in that position in a public spectacle, and now you've handed them a challenge that's not a nail sticking up for them to hammer down. You have to engage your players in a non-combat manner if you want them to engage with the world in a non-combat manner. You also have to find out during your session 0, what do they want? If they want combat, you have no place setting them in those situations where combat's not an option.
Right. Yeah, you have to give them what they want.
So you could be having a. Okay, I'm hearing echo, so I don't know who's got me on speaker. But your group of adventurers has spotted a gigantic dragon that's heading for this small town, and when you rush in to evacuate everybody, the guild goes, "Hey, not so fast. This is a big tourist season for us." Oh, but there's a huge dragon. Yeah, okay, yeah, I understand. We've heard about the dragon. Yeah, do you realize how much money we're going to lose if we evacuate the city? This is how we make our living for the entire year. Of course, I'm making references to Jaws, obviously, but that can be just as much. There's no combat encounter there to be won. You're not going to slay the town sheriff and everybody else to get everybody to agree to evacuate to save everybody's lives. So, I mean, and what Dave was saying is true. It's your players are going to respond to what you present to them. So if all you're presenting them with is combat opportunities, don't bitch and complain if all they do is engage in combat. There's really nothing else you can do. I would say, to take it a step back and talk about this layered conversation we're having, is don't just throw things at the players that you think are necessarily interesting, and don't go so one-dimensional in your approach. And I'm going to say this. So let's take it back a step to the highwaymen. Why are they highwaymen? What are these characters doing? Why do they do this a lot? Are they Robin Hood's men? Why are they stealing and ripping people off?
Are they just assholes?
Yeah, they just assholes. Are they mercenaries? Are they trying to put together? Are they trying to raise funds for an army to defeat a tyrannical king 3 kingdoms over? What's their motivation for being there? And I know that sounds like so much. Oh God, really? I have to worry about their fucking backgrounds. This is a combat encounter, but you should worry about their background so you know not how to run the combat, but how they react to the players and what happened.
Right, and what consequences are going to be happening because of this combat? Because, like you said, perfect example of what you said. So they're trying to get money together to form a mercenary band to get rid of that king, but your players kill them all. Well, then what's going to happen in that kingdom? Take those consequences and kind of look at, if you know their background, you can know some sort of consequence that's going to come down the road.
If you're creating combat for the sole purpose of combat, you're throwing unnamed random bandit group A at your player characters because at this moment you need a combat beat. This is where I get to say you're doing it wrong, specifically for Savage Worlds. Now, this is where I can stand on the actual way the game works. If you're throwing a combat at the player characters in Savage Worlds just because it's time for a combat, you're absolutely doing it wrong because you have just thrown death at your player characters. Someone can and possibly will die every time the dice hit the table. Every time as a GM, you just throw combat on the table, you're attempting to kill a player character, essentially. You need to think about that and only offer combat to the players when the world has a reason for there to be combat. If this is a goblin tribe that's attacking on the road, that's great. But what's the goblins' motivation? Are they just there to get food and provisions for the village? Then they're not going to fight to the death. They're goblins. They're going to see one goblin go down, decide this group isn't worth robbing, and run the hell away and rob the next group that comes down the road. But if it's a group of professional highwaymen who are being paid their own weight in silver to stop all trade on this road because their lord is sending an army across the road 2 fathoms down to attack a kingdom that no one can know about, they're going to stand and fight to the death, because if they don't, their army gets found out about and the attack doesn't succeed. And suddenly you have just created a situation where that persuasion check, the social conflict, doesn't stop the combat from happening. And these guys sell their lives very dearly to attack the player characters. They're trying to stop them or trying to intimidate them to go the other way. Mm-hmm. Once you know those motivations, the thing in your world that caused that combat to occur, and you have a reason for the combat, then you have a reason for those characters to react the way they do, and to maybe stop halfway through, or multiple times where a negotiation happens during the fight.
Right, and the other thing too is when it does come down to combat, remember these in the situation we're talking about, these are highly trained mercenaries. They know how to take advantage of cover. They know about, hey, you know what? If we create smoke on the battlefield, it's easier for us not to get hit by arrows. Hey, our strategy is going to keep them away from melee. We've sized up this party. I don't see too many rangers in that party, and I see a lot of people with swords. So guess what? We're not going to give them the benefit of getting into melee range with us. We're going to fire and take our 6 paces back. Fire and take our 6 steps back. And we're going to keep moving back away the whole time.
Do it at dusk. Use the sun to your advantage so they can't see you as well. Things like that. Use environmental stuff.
Use the environment, but use the appropriate environment. If the players are the ones that are launching the attack, then find out. Was it midday? Was it morning? Was it afternoon? Is there a stream nearby? Is there, rough ground? Is there areas where the player characters have to give you an agility check because of, rolling logs? I don't care what you add to that situation, but it shouldn't just be 2 groups of guys who attack each other on level, flat ground in perfect sunlight at midday with no obstructions and no cover and no smoke and no bonuses, no penalties. That's boring as hell, unless it's an attack at midday on the high road and it's appropriate.
Right. So, the thing you have to do, too, because Savage Worlds is such a cinematic system, that it has the swinginess that it has. It relies a lot on – it does really rely a lot on cinematic tropes. It really does. The tactics that are in there, the ability that you can take as many actions as you want in a round, amazing, unheard of in a role-playing game. As many as you want. No limit, just a -2 for each additional action after the first all actions. Okay.
Power and rapid attack at anything above, I don't know, veteran rank, you're killing, I would say, personally, you're probably going to kill 6 mooks a round.
But we're just saying, that the flip side of that sword, too, is apply penalties for rough ground. Play your NPCs smart. They take cover. They fire, go back into cover, pop out of cover, fire, go back into cover. They run, hit the deck, and roll. They go on hold and wait. They interrupt your other player's actions. They use strategy. They use tactics. They don't just stand there and trade blows like chess pieces on a chessboard.
The enemy bad guy at full range for the full short range for their weapon sits there and goes on hold. And when your spellcaster steps out from behind cover and starts doing boobly with their hands, they declare an interrupt, they roll, make the agility check, and shoot the archer, shaking them. And then they end their turn back in cover. Now the turn reverts back to the caster, and the caster now can only take free actions because they're shaken, and they don't get a chance to recover because the start of their turn happened before the attack occurred.
Right, so they don't get that free ability to unshake at the beginning of their turn because their turn's already started. Right, and these are okay, and also, too, I'm going to put this caveat in. These are very advanced GM techniques. And as much as I hate to say it, the book is not going to help you. The core rules is not going to help you do what we're talking about. The core rules is going to go, hey, here's all the ingredients. How do you make an incredible pie? I don't know. But the ingredients are all here if you choose to use this to make an incredible pie. You have to mix that. You have to be the one that figures out how all that works. Here's some suggestions. You can use chases to make things more interesting. Here's a set of rules for doing that. Ooh, we can do dramatic task over time. Let's talk about dramatic tasks for a second. I want to kind of branch off there. I just went ooh squirrel, but let's talk about that for a second. That doesn't have to be consecutive 6-second rounds that dramatic task is taking place over. Those 5 rounds can last over a week. They can last over a day or hours. They don't have to be concurrent, and they don't all have to be made by the same individual with the same role either.
So I'm going to just throw this out there. A couple of weeks ago before I got sick, I ran the first game for my nieces and nephews. I was running a play test of a product that I know is in development that I got a chance to get my hands on. And it calls for the player characters to enter this like ruined manor house and search it. And as they're going about it, it actually says right in the product, run this as a dramatic task, have each character making appropriate rolls based on where in the manor house they say they're searching. And you run the entire search of the house as a dramatic task. And, you know, if whoever searches the larder, these are the challenges that are available, etc. And the interesting aspect of it was, if someone draws a club for a complication, what that means is that they've gotten into combat. And the face value of that card determined how many people they suddenly found, whether it was a wandering patrol or if it was a lone guy sleeping in a corner or whatnot. It takes the entire idea of a dramatic task, and that could take 6 hours. And it was one roll per player character, and each card draw did something different. Each card draw meant, you know, oh, well, they were searching the armory. They're going to make a fighting roll to see what weapons are available and if anything's of good use. They're in the kitchen. They're going to give a knowledge roll and find out how long it's been since fresh provisions were used in this kitchen, or how long the wood has gone unburnt if they choose to use survival. Each room had its own kind of couple of different challenges that the player character gets proffered by the GM based on what the player describes they're searching for in each room. And that way, this encounter, the way it was written, was entirely written so that combat could happen, but only if the character drew a specific card, failed their roll to deal with the complication, or chose to initiate combat as soon as the enemy appeared.
Right. Well, and we talked about it and used it in practice too to say, hey, we're running a cyberpunk game. Your hacker, when the combat breaks out, your hacker is doing a hacking dramatic task that's going to last 5 rounds. So when you deal him into initiative, that's his turn for that dramatic task, while everybody else is basically giving him cover and buying him time in that combat. And if he pulls a complication, ice attack. The intrusion countermeasures have found you, and they're launching an attack against you. And that way, the difference between the dramatic task for the hacker and the combat for everybody else is seamless. You don't need to stop and tell everybody, okay, everybody go take a bio break while we hack the mainframe. Nope. Savage Worlds gives you the tools to let it happen all at once. You just have to, as a GM, conceptualize that and use it to your advantage at the table. And that's kind of what we're talking about with tonight's episode with Layers is don't do the same cliched approach that you're used to with other role-playing games when you come to Savage Worlds, and I know that is a big debate, like, okay, well, wait a minute. What about monsters? How do we grab a monster? Well, you just, and I think there's a shorthand that we've all developed as Savage Worlds GMs that we don't stop and think about when we're talking to somebody who's brand new to this, looking at the rule book going, I don't get it. I'm used to paint by numbers GMing systems that tell me do 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And here's the individual steps along the way. With this, when you come to Savage World, you just got, how do I do? And people in the community will go, what are you, stupid? It's the bestiary. Just pick any monster. It doesn't fucking matter. Well, but wait a minute.
Just pick it and trap, and as we like to say, trap it.
Right.
Wait, that's a bingo. That's a bingo square.
Trap
it. Say just trap it.
I think though the conceit that goes into that is also whenever we try to answer that question for people, we also automatically assume they came from D&D, because the immediate thing is to tell people you don't need X number of goblins per level for the player characters to have gone up a level. You don't need 9 encounters in the dungeon because they need to kill 5 goblins in each room 9 times to get the XP by the end of the adventure they're supposed to get. So we assume that that's where they're coming from, and we try to answer that question without finding out, hey, maybe this player used to play Amber Diceless and just does not understand the idea that they only get to narrate up to the point action happens, and then they have to roll some dice and then look to the GM for a response to how it occurs.
She's kind of hot, but she cost me a lot of money, lots of dollar bills. Amber Diceless. Sorry.
That's okay. I'm still a big fan of that. Who was that on? Was it on the Savage Jack's Bar and Grill? It's a particular person that came on as a guest host, or wrote in an email calling Amber Diceless a whore.
Oh yeah, I don't remember.
I remember that gag. It was an awesome gag. It's an inside gag. But I think too, the thing is that, listen, being a GM is a hard job.
It is.
At the end of the day, it is a fucking thankless job. You better enjoy doing it, or you're not going to last long. The nice thing about Savage Worlds is that the rules are very streamlined, and they work with a certain clockwork precision that isn't obvious when you first pick up the rule book.
Yeah, you just have to wind the clock a certain way, I guess.
So let me ask this. Is GMing a hard job, or is GMing for other GMs when it becomes a hard job?
Well, GMing for other GMs, that's meta to begin with, and that's an automatic. Okay, I'm ready for a challenge. Bring it on. That's a special herd of cats that you gotta corral.
I agree. I think GMing is maybe not hard, but it
demanding.
Can be demanding. Yeah, it's a demanding thing to do because people don't think about it, but it's really all on your shoulders to start. I mean, once the people get to the table, like Jib says, lots of things can happen, but you gotta. I think even if you're an improv GM, you gotta put some work in up front to run a game, just plain and simple. Some people, maybe they can sit down and just run with doing absolutely nothing. But there's a little bit of prep involved, and that's one thing about Savage Worlds is it's not a ton if you don't want it to be.
Yeah,
but it's there.
I think the prep in Savage Worlds is knowing your lore, reading all the flavor text that's in that setting book.
Yeah.
Stop and think about this for a second, and really, think about all of your players. How many of your players who are playing in any given setting, let's say we're all playing ETU, how many people other than the GM have read that book cover to cover? They have really, truly dug in and read every one of those little lore articles about all the background characters, all the dorms, and what this dorm houses and what that dorm houses, and which one's the sport dorm versus the girls dorm, and the one that's the old dorm from when the college was first set up as an all
right
school. How many people have actually dug deep enough to know all of that when they sat down at the table to play? Your job as a GM is to know that well enough to be able to draw from any piece of it when your players go there and interact with it.
Right. Yeah. Very true.
Well, and let's see, I was kind of like running down a thought earlier. It's low prep, but there's a high demand for you to know how the rules work. Clockwork precision, that's what I wanted to talk about. So Savage Worlds has a certain simple isn't a appropriate word. Elegant is an appropriate word. It has a clockwork precision too. If you pull one thread of that rule and go, this is a bullshit rule, and pull one thread of that, it has a cascading effect through the rest of everything else. Like, what you mean this bullshit about you drawing a weapons in action? Oh, I fucking hate that. Not in my game. And then you got an edge somebody took that allows them to do that. Now they're like, well, why the fuck did I just wasted this edge? Oh shit, I didn't think about that.
Yeah. Oh, now I'm going to take that edge out of the game, and then I'm going to take that edge out, and then it's going to take something else out of the game. And you're like, oh shit, right. I should have just made it an action, which makes sense that it is an action. I'm pulling a weapon out. I am acting in order to get that weapon out. Come on, man.
To point to beyond the weapon draw is movement. When you really stop and think about how movement works in Savage Worlds, when someone declares they're going to run, unless you're playing on a tabletop, running is one of the hardest things to deal with in a theater of the mind game, because how far did they get? Well, they can roll a d6, and that's an extra number of inches on the tabletop that you're not using. So unless you as the GM are thinking literally in inches, you have a mental tabletop in your head where you can move them around and describe that well to your players. How do you rectify, well, is a success on the run die? They rolled more than a 4, means they got to where they were trying to get to. What does fleet-footed do? Where now they're rolling a higher die and they have a longer base pace. Can they get further with a normal walk? They could on the tabletop, but now in theater of the mind, how do you run that? There's a lot of things that we absolutely take for granted that you really have to stop and take a step back to realize how deep that rabbit hole goes for that one edge, that one little tweak that you're going to make. And suddenly, how does that affect the speed power? How does it affect fleet-footed? How does it affect flight? How does it affect vehicles, which have their own entire layout for how movement works? All of those things are a cascading thing off of simply deciding to run theater of the mind instead of tabletop.
Right. And to answer that question, not to be pedantic, but 1 inch on the tabletop equals 6 feet in the real world, approximately. So you can still, but you're still playing a guessing game because you're not measuring something out on the table. I understand what you're saying. You can still approximate, but that once again, that takes a lot of mental preparedness on the time that you're like, oh shit, okay, how far is it really from the door? Well, it's plot appropriate distance.
Exactly.
Okay.
I was about to say the same thing.
Let's see, what is plot appropriate distance? Could they make it this round if they run and get a 4? Let me do the mental calculations. 636 feet. 6 feet 40.
Sure,
yeah, they can make it. But as a GM, you need to present what is the factor carry the 4 to 6? It should be absolutely if you make a success of this roll.
But what I've said with that is, okay, if you want to run, you can get there, but it's going to cost you an action, and if you do anything else, you're going to be a -2. So if you want to run, you can get there. And I don't do that mental calculation. I go, okay, you want to run, you can get there, but that's obviously an action.
Right.
Typically what I'll do, I know Jared's very fond of the plot appropriate distance, but I'll actually tell people you're at short range. That means you could move there, walking this round, you could get there, or any weapon you have that has a short range and that's the modifier you're using. It's at medium range. You would have to give me a successful run roll. It's at long range. That's 2 rounds of movement, including a run, to get there. You just flat out, you're not going to move from where you are to where something is at long range in a single round.
Exactly. Yeah.
Have this power, or that's where somebody who has the fleet-footed edge. Absolutely, if you give that.
And that's I think Dave. I think you hit it. That's a really good way to do it.
And these are things that I've been forced to think about because I run exclusively theater of the mind. I don't run anything on a map. Right. I'll occasionally throw up an image to let people have a frame of reference, but I always tell them this is the way this is going to work. And by communicating that to them, they know the value of fleet-footed in my game is, that means I can move a little further in a single round. And I have that larger die, I might actually roll the raise and be able to move 2 range increments in a single move, etc.
Well, I think too that Savage Worlds is as a GM is a slightly different paradigm from most other role-playing games as far as the attitude that you have to take towards it. And this is just my own personal philosophy with Savage Worlds and GMing in general. Your job as a GM is to be a curator of the experience and the story, not to be a direct opposing force to the player characters, to the characters, or to the players necessarily. So at the end of the day, it becomes, this is here's our museum. This is our story. This is our world that's taking place. Now, there's a lovely exhibit over here about pirates off of the East Wing. And anything you would like to know about that exhibit in that area, I am your tour guide. I can tell you every exhibit in there, blah, blah, blah. Now, Am I pulling it whole thread out of my ass as we're walking to the East Wing? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that could absolutely happen. But if it's...
Or you're very meticulously using Buccaneer Through Hell and High Water from a certain Kickstarter that closed not that long ago.
Well, you know what they say. Good artists borrow, great artists steal outright.
Exactly.
So, but as a curator of the experience, it's also about understanding what are the motivations of the world, what are the motivations of the bad guys. Wait a minute, what is an alligator doing in Oregon? If you're running Lake Placid, if you're running an episode of Lake Placid, it's like, wait a minute, what is a 25-foot gigantic crocodile doing in a lake in Oregon?
He came out of the sewers. He got flushed down.
And if you're in the kind of game of like where you go the George Lucas effect of details, then go ahead and wave your hand and go details. Who knows? It's just there. But you as a GM should understand what that creature's motivations are, why it's there, how it hunts and preys, and that's even if you're just pulling it out of your ass as you're going along. It's your job as a GM to give it that at least some fleeting thought about what's going on in the world. And we've kind of talked about this too. As far as setting up an encounter, a big bad guy does not, in any movie I've ever seen, a big bad guy does not just walk into the room without first, okay, we're going to use Jabba the Hutt as a big bad guy. When does Jabba encounter the player characters? On his ground, on his terms, surrounded by his henchmen in his throne room, with everybody totally disarmed, and him the only one in control of fucking everything. Right. With a giant monster. Right. With a giant monster in the fucking basement and a trap door in case anybody gives him a fucking lip. Does he just walk up to the good guys and challenge them? Fuck no. He's the big bad. He's smarter than that. He has guys to do his dying for him. So why, as a GM, do you put Jabba the Hutt right in the middle of the party and then bemoan his death? Well, I thought it would be an interesting challenge. Okay, well, that's a bad big bad guy. He doesn't deserve to live. He's a bad big bad guy. He's not your big bad. And
not smart enough to be a big bad.
Right.
So let me ask this, and maybe this is where we start getting into truly like the advanced layer, the core of the onion level GMing. Do I even have a big bad? Because I typically don't.
I usually don't either.
The big bad is a video game movie trope. It does not belong in RPGs at the table, in my opinion. So I don't use big bads. I might have a wild card or two that are significant NPCs, but they're not the big bad.
I would say that my approach is probably I will have a big bad, but in the sense that Tolkien's Lord of the Rings has a big bad. There's a evil force of the universe, or it's the universe or society itself that is against the player characters, not something that they can walk up and kill and wipe out. They may never get access to it, but it's still a driving force in the world. It could be your big bad. Well, I don't necessarily see anything wrong with having a big bad in role-playing games. I really don't. With the caveat that you understand there's this clause in the big bad's contract. You may be taken out by the player characters at the most inopportune time. You agree that you were fully responsible for all liability, blah, 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 blah. No pissing and moaning if you get killed.
At the very bottom, it says deal with it.
Right.
See, okay, so let me make a different example. Carlin Kendrick put in chat, the big bad is just the guy running the show. That's it. And I disagree.
I can disagree with that
Stop and think about, if we're talking Star Wars, that's a really common one I can use. In Star Wars, the big bad is who? Some people would say Vader. Some people would say the Empire. Mm-hmm. Me? I don't see a big bad. I see significant NPCs. I see Snoke. I see Darth Maul. I see Sidious. I see Tyrannus. I see Jango Fett. I see the leader of the bug race, the Geonosians. I see the leader of the frickin' Jar Jar Binks Gungan race, Bossnos. Each one of these is a significant NPC in the world who offers some form of a challenge, a roadblock, an obstacle, or an actual force of opposition to the player characters. But if they defeat them, the world doesn't end. There's another guy who will rise from the ranks named Hux, who's going to build an entire planet into another Death Star because Vader and Sidious both died. Because the Empire continues, because the world of Star Wars continues on. I don't need a big bad. I need an understanding of this world so I can go, okay, you killed the highest ranking person in the Empire. What happens next? Does the Empire have, does the Empire have a constitution that lays out that the vice president and then the Joint Chiefs of Staff and a chain of succession, or is this you killed the Emperor, so Darth Vader starts killing everybody in the galaxy so he can be the new Emperor? You have to decide what the next major thing is that happens in the world as the GM, but you don't need a big bad. You need a force that continues forward, the progression of time, the progression of the world around the player characters that's completely absent of a big bad or a master plan. I think, again, those are tropes that have been used quite extensively in movies and in video games, but in a role-playing sense, because your players are allowed to just decide, we don't kill the Emperor, we work for him. Does that suddenly mean I have to throw out the Emperor as the big bad and write up Mon Mothma as the big bad? No, it just means there's a different set of important NPCs that become challenges, roadblocks, and obstacles to the player characters.
Right. It just means that now Luke Skywalker and his friends are after you. You would decide to work for the Emperor. Oh, well, Han and Luke and the rest of them, now they're after you. I understand what you're saying, that it's more of a trope than anything else, and I think a lot of people are married to the concept. I think big bad is a nice generic term that just applies to the biggest opposition in the room at the moment. Oh God, there's a dragon. The dragon's the big bad in this setting, in this arena. The dragon's the big bad. Blah blah blah. But you mentioned another thing too, machinations. When you're talking about, okay, well, Palpatine gets. Oh shit! Now there's this huge power vacuum, and there are a lot of contenders for that fucking throne who want that level of power. Oh, look out! Here they come.
You've just brought Game of Thrones into Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. Right. Same thing like in a Mafia game. You kill one of the main bosses, that could bring down some heat. But more than anything else, now the rest of the families are scrambling to take over their part of the town, or trying to instill a new mob boss.
Yeah. So you think that taking out that mob boss is going to make everything settle down and get back to some sort of semblance of order and things like that, when really all you've done is ratcheted up the hell and the discord, and everything's going to just fucking blow up now because everybody's trying to take over. And so, Family A's fighting Family B, and Family B's fighting Family C, and you've got this whole huge thing now because that happened. But just think of how much more story you have now because of that. Mm-hmm. If you play it right.
And I would say too, let's get back to combat for just a second. Combat should be multi-layered. If you're ever going to run a combat encounter, it should be multi-layered. And here's what I mean by that. It's not straight on characters versus villains, toe-to-toe. Nope. It's happening, and there's also a ticking clock that is requiring somebody else's attention. So, for example, the ship's about to crash. The airplane's about to crash into a mountain because somebody shot the pilot. So an errant bullet in your combat kills the crew piloting the ship. Now we're in a nosedive. Okay, so who's going to break off and go take care of that so we don't crash and die? And then there's a whole set of challenges that are not necessarily combat for those two players. And you're
happening during that challenge.
Right. Now you're on unstable ground.
Angle, so everything's difficult ground. And
right.
Yeah, and you just brought a dramatic task into it.
Possibly.
Yeah, very possibly.
Maybe then you also have the bad guy taking advantage of the fact of chaos and wanting more chaos. So instead of attacking the players directly, he shoots out the window to cause a vacuum that makes the air thinner. So now everybody's making vigor rolls. People are freaking out in their seats and clogging the aisles. That's the kind of combat layering we're talking about, where you can take a very simple combat encounter and just by tweaking the environment and turning screws, you can turn that into, oh shit, well, we were fighting in a bar. Now we're fighting in a bar that's about to crash into a mountain that some asshole has set on fire. And now we've got rats pouring in through the cracks, trying to eat us alive. Holy shit. What should have been a simple fist fight is now blowing up into this full Indiana Jones style escapade of, oh my fuck, somebody get me out of here.
So talking about combats with layers, if people go back and watch a long ago episode of the show, we did 3 shows for ETU, and in one of them, Jared has a scene that is literally a throwaway scene where the characters walk up, say some stuff, maybe roll a single skill, and walk away with a cup that they need, and instead, Ed, being the guy who wrote this, has his character walk up and punch the guy you're supposed to talk to, just to throw a monkey wrench at Jared. And all of a sudden, you had a combat happening at a frat party with the police arriving, where your player characters need an item from inside the house that they have to sneak in to get during this fight. So you can absolutely have this happen even when the players start a combat you didn't plan. You planned, this is a simple, they need to hack the computer, or they steal the painting, or whatever, and then the players decide, hey, we're hammers, this is a nail, I'm just going to go combat. You can still use that thing you planned as the twist, as the ticking clock, as the other thing they have to also achieve. And absolutely put a time limit on it. Have the police about to arrive. Have the plane about to crash into the mountain. Whatever you need to do, but be careful, because what happens when they fail? Is there a way for the player characters to recover from that, or do you have an idea? Is this, well, they failed, and now I'm going to have to stand up and go to the bathroom because I've got to pull something else out of my ass because I set a ticking clock on them that they failed to achieve, and I didn't have anything to actually happen when the clock went on.
Right.
Well, and I'll say this too: you have to, as a GM, when you embrace the idea of, listen, we're going to run a multi-layered encounter, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be combat. It could be a court trial. It could be a defuse the bomb. Whatever your multi-layered event is, absolutely put multi-layers into it. Make it, story and drama arise out of conflict. So pepper as much conflict in that souffle as you could pack in there that makes sense. Like, not all of a sudden, like, oh no, aliens land and now there's an alien army. What in the middle of zombie apocalypse? Oh no, now there's aliens controlling. Oh Jesus! I'm not saying go to that extent. Make it reasonable for what's happening in your storyline, but also as a GM, and you have to embrace when the player character goes completely off script and says, "Okay, wait a minute. So we're in ETU. We think somebody's being sacrificed in the basement, but the basement's locked, and the frat house is full of cultists." Okay, so I'm gonna run out, get in the Ford pickup. I'm gonna turn that bitch over. I'm driving it up the frat house, down the hall, and into the basement. Full bore, pedal to the metal, balls out. And then at the last minute, as I'm coming down the steps, I'm gonna open the door. I'm gonna shoulder roll out of the vehicle, and I'm gonna fire two-fisted at the gas tank as it flies towards that demon thing that they're trying to sacrifice it to. You as a GM have to be ready to go. You're doing what? Okay, Jesus, how do we do this? It's a dramatic test. Okay, this is a dramatic test, but not to block the action, not to go, get the fuck out of here.
This is where it's all of a sudden your job to go, yes, yes, you absolutely are, and here's what happens.
And here's how to make it happen if you need to, with whatever die rolls.
Right, and then you had the GM have to go, well, wait, I didn't prepare or plan for that. Okay, feasibly, what will happen? It's a snake god. It's afraid of fire. I don't know. A huge fireball of a Ford F-150 flying at it. It's probably going to scare the living shit even out of a demon snake god. Okay, yeah, he's probably going to retract into the sewers and come back another day.
Right. Think his life through. Think his life choices through, and then come back.
Right, after a few therapy sessions with a psychiatrist.
Right. They tried to kill me with a flaming truck, those sons of bitches.
A guy goes out for a nice dinner on the town. Next thing you know, he's being assaulted.
This is an oddly specific.
Just saying, done that to Dave in an ETU adventure. Just saying. And that's what Dave's talking about. Like, well, geez, when you choose to play with other GMs who are now your players, you're really accepting a mantle of the challenge. So yeah, don't be so mired in the rules and limitations of the rules if you're going to layer things. I mean, for example, I don't know how far we got in our discussion earlier about skills, but well, where's the disguise skill? Oh, well, I need to create this new skill called disguise. No, it's a persuasion. Think about what the outcome is that you're looking for from the skill test.
Yeah.
What are we
trying to look like something in a crowd? Stealth. Right. If you're trying to disguise yourself to pass as somebody in a conversation, that's a persuasion check. I mean, and obviously if they've done something like the whole Mission Impossible voice changer and rubber mask thing, right, they get some bonuses, but it really shouldn't be something where you try to bolt on more complexity for Savage Worlds. Savage Worlds is very much an Occam's razor style system. Find the simplest solution and go with that.
Yeah, and there's still an opportunity for very in-depth role play, very in-depth rules education with it. You just have to go, okay, with Savage Worlds, I think the best advice I could give a new GM for Savage Worlds or a new player, think about the intent of your actions. Don't worry about the rule. What's the intent? What are we trying to accomplish essentially with this? Okay, well, there's no body slam edge. How do I pick a guy up and throw him off of a ship? Is that throwing? It doesn't seem right for me to use the throwing skill. No, okay, stop and think about what you're doing. You're trying to push him off of the ship. There's a push maneuver. Use that. Even if you're trapping it as I pick him up over my head like World WWE wrestler and body slam him against the back. Fine, I'm not going to make you make a throwing roll to throw him 6 feet. But if you just want to say, I grab him by the wrist, swing him around, let go. Okay, that's just a push maneuver with a trapping on it. That's all that is.
Or even just a strength roll.
Well, that's what the push maneuver is. It's a post strength.
Do the job.
Yeah, it's a post strength rolls.
Yeah, easy enough.
And I think this also goes back to something that we talked about before from Wiggy from Whispers of the Pit, is when a player describes something to you, don't immediately latch on to the things they say. I'm going to run up the wall. I'm going to do a backflip. I'm going to cut the guy over the eyebrow. Okay, that's not a
running roll
plus an agility trick plus an attack, because of you got to do the agility trick for the backflip and the movement for running up the wall and the attack to attack them over the eye. No, it's an agility check to blind them for a second, which is called shaken. Shaken handles the being blinded for a few seconds. They don't need a blinded status. We don't need a status for confuzzled, shell shocked. I see a lot of people when I see house rules and I see new settings coming out and I'm being asked to consult on them. Here's this brand new mechanic and it's overt and complex and it does all this amazing stuff, but it also could have just been a dramatic task or a social conflict or an agility roll is all it needed. And you've got 9 steps. It's going to bog your game down and cross-references 4 charts and 6 card draws. And Get out of here.
Right. Well, let's talk about this one real quick. Oh, I want to tell if this guy's lying to me. This is a big one for me. I think he's lying. Okay, so as a GM, how do you handle that? Do you handle that in totally narrative terms? Like, yeah, okay, well, he might be lying. Well, I want to make a roll to figure out how he's lying. Really? What skill are you going to use? Do you have lie detector? I mean, what skill are you going to use to detect whether he's lying?
No,
Or are you trying to persuade
lovely
him?
notice roll.
Or are you trying to persuade him to go, you know what? I think you're lying to me. Why don't you tell me the truth?
Now,
Could that
I
be a
will say
persuasion roll?
Persuasion specifically says it's to get what you want from somebody. Streetwise says it is the ability to get information from other people. Streetwise is effectively your ability to socially engineer somebody into saying something they didn't mean to say, revealing something they didn't mean to reveal. Streetwise could also be that ability to tell if they're bullshitting you.
Mm-hmm.
That ability to know, they're selling this a little too hard. Or notice to see their eyes always narrow when they talk about that topic. So they're still hiding something about it, or there's something about it they don't want to talk about. Maybe they don't know what it is, but they don't want to talk about it. You can feather in little pieces of information that don't even have to give away their line. If you simply say, okay, well, give me a notice roll. Okay, what you've realized from that, 2 raises is that every time you say the word arc, their eyes narrow and their left eyebrow goes up ever so slightly. Right. Every single time. That's their pattern to their speech. What does that tell the player character? That's up to the player. Your job as a GM is not to tell them, yes, the person is lying. It's to tell them, well, what did they see? What did that tell them? If they say, well, I want to use, streetwise, you get the feeling there's something off about what they're saying, but you don't honestly know. It's not magical. You can't read their thoughts. Now, if they have psionics and use a telepathy skill, they absolutely read their thoughts and know what's going on, but that's a different situation.
Oh, what about seduction? I want to seduce somebody. Social conflict roles using persuasion.
Absolutely.
And on Uber successes, 5 or more margin of victory, you could kind of say you kind of have the puppet power over that person. They're so enamored with you that oh my God, they're ready to marry you and follow you around. You're the only thing they think about. They can't sleep or eat. And now you've made it more interesting, because here's the thing: player characters shouldn't always get what they want exactly the way they want it. As far as the story goes, if you decide to seduce somebody to get a piece of information out of them, and you do the job too well and you're too convincing, well, now you've got a lovesick pup following you around, getting in the way of things. Mm-hmm. And then now, oh my God, how do you? You're trying to run a con on somebody else, and next thing you know, here they come up running, going, Gloria! Oh shit! You just blew my cover.
Or they show up and they're jealous because you're talking to somebody else suddenly.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I reckon. Okay, so I mean, this was a pretty loose topic to begin with, as far as the kind of things we're going to talk about. I think we sufficiently really talked about the combat encounter, not to be so reliant on combat as resolution. Is there anything else in the chat room that anybody else wants to bring up, or that we haven't addressed as part of layering and stepping up your game as a GM?
And if you're going to really layer, make sure you get the right product. Sorry.
So are you talking about like a fine hold? You're talking about a strong hold gel followed by maybe a light dusting of mousse?
Yeah, exactly.
You're talking like a bed head, sort of like, are we talking about a finger combing or a more rough combing on the sides?
It's granola, and then berries, and then yogurt, and then
yes, yes, that's how you layer.
One thing that somebody did offer in chat that we didn't touch on is the Sophie's Choice, Sophie's Choice is absolutely something you can throw at people as a challenge that's not combat, but your Sophie's Choice has to be a result of the multi-layering it's not in and of itself a new layer. You're not adding a new layer or a new wrinkle to something. It has to be a wrinkle you've added previously. Otherwise, there's no emotional impact to the choice, and therefore it's not a true Sophie's choice. The one that Jared likes to bring up is the whole, well, I'm going to launch a nuclear missile at Los Angeles and New York. Well, if player characters don't care about Los Angeles and New York, then that's not a Sophie's choice to them. They could still just attack the Lex Luthor that's standing in front of them and let both cities die if they don't care.
Right.
So you have to give them an emotional reason as both a player and a character to care about something that is the result of a layer you've put in before, whether that layer is a girlfriend or a family member or something that you introduced that lives in that city, or, you know, an oath to the king of far off town that's going to be destroyed if you make this choice right now to save, you know, I could save this child's life who I just rescued in the previous village and I've been protecting, trying to take home, or I can fulfill my oath to my king and give them the child and save the kingdom. Now I have an emotional choice to choose between, but both of those have to have been wrinkles from other encounters to get me invested.
Right. Well, and the thing too with the Sophie's choice is just the hard choices. Just give them hard. It's the conflicting things. I want to really stress, not your job as a GM to challenge your players. And I know that's not PC. It's not, a popular opinion. Not your job to challenge the players. Not your job to construct a conflict intended to win over your players or challenge your players. That's I don't know if that's a D&D concept. I don't know if that's a Gygaxian concept. You're not going for a TPK. You're not trying to kill anybody. You're not trying. That's what I'm looking. It's those opportunities should arise naturally out of story development and be organic. I could go, okay, well, I want to manufacture this human goblin war. So I'm going to spend hours in the lab constructing this human goblin war and setting up the conditions so I can challenge my players with this human goblin. Stop. Let the players kill a goblin in cold blood. And then that opportunity unfolds in front of you. Oh, well, his compatriots find him slain in a field in cold blood. And there's tracks all around, and there's evidence of humans. They start tracking the party. And then now it's, well, we had this treaty with the other town. Oh, now we're gonna go talk to the Goblin King. That arises out of the player's choices. There's opportunities right in there in the story. You don't need to worry about creating those challenges. You need to worry about leveraging those opportunities in the story. So it's going to feel forced. It's going to feel like, wait, why are you being a dick? Why are you being a dick GM? When you go, okay, well, the guard, you meet at the front, the guard says, hey, you have to check your weapons here at the gate. And you decide to go, fuck you. This is my father's sword. Nobody gets it. I carry it with me at all times. Okay, well, the players made a character choice.
Mm-hmm. They barge past the guard and they walk into the room, and it's the king at prayer in front of the entire court, and the player's sword is still in their scabbard, and they are told to stop. And you challenge that, and you say, you can't bring that weapon in here. What, this weapon? And now the player has just broken the law and drawn a weapon in the presence of the king and broken the peace. And now the player is taken at arms by the guards in front of the entire court, clasped in irons, thrown in the dungeon, and now faces a hard choice. Normally, the punishment for this is death, or you can swear a year of your life in service to the king to make up for the fact that you broke the king's peace in the king's palace.
Right, and now your compatriots may go, fuck this, we're breaking him out. It's a jailbreak now. Great. Let him absolutely do that. Now they're wanted fugitives.
Yeah.
Now there's, and the kingdom has an alliance with 3 other kingdoms that you decide, well, here's what's going to happen. And then you sit back and let them walk in or walk out of that. I'm just saying, just learn to have a keen eye to the story and the opportunities rather than trying to manufacture a forced
And
challenge.
don't rescue them from their choices. Don't suddenly decide that, no, drawing a weapon in the king's throne room isn't against the law. If it's been established in the lore of the game that that's against the law, the players did that. They need to suffer what the world would react to.
Yep.
Yeah, because
So-
you're taking away from the game if you do that.
You're taking away their choice. They
Right.
made a choice to do this thing that's against the law. Maybe they want to play an outlaw. Maybe they want to have an example to point back to later on to have that law removed from the books. Maybe that's the thing that player has decided matters to them about this game. Their character's got a motivation to have that law removed. And you just made that something that's completely not necessary. You may have taken away hours and hours of gameplay for that player character in roleplay because you decided it was more expedient to simply hand wave something.
Yep. Yeah, just look for the opportunities, layer your combats. Remember, your job is to make life interesting for your player characters. Not your job to challenge them. Your job to look for opportunities that naturally exist in that story and magnify them. Blow them up. Let's, okay, you know what? You wanted to be a hero. You will suffer. And suffer greatly for being a hero. I would say the one last thing too with the Sophie's Choice issue: don't ignore their hindrances. And I'm not a big fan of forcing the role play of hindrances. I'm okay as a GM with going, hey, wait a minute, are you really going to run from this fight? I mean, you've got the arrogant hindrance. You think you're the best there ever fucking was. You're really going to back down from this ogre who's calling you out?
You're loyal, and your buddy just had his leg broken.
Yeah, you're just going to leave him behind? Really? I mean, it's up to you. If you go back for him in the burning building to rescue him, I'll give you a penny for playing the hindrance, but I just wanted to call that to your attention. It's totally up to you with what you want to do with it. You're heroic. If you're heroic in one of my games, there are going to be lots of opportunities to save damsels in distress, children in need of saving, orphans, cats in trees. It's going to be like, oh, Jesus.
Come at the risk of life and limb.
Yeah. Every time I walk out the door, there's somebody wanting me to rescue somebody. Jesus. Well,
yeah, that's what happens when you're a hero.
So with that said, until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Chris, the Savage Mommy, and Dave, the Rules Maven Scott, saying keep rolling, stay savage.